Hi, everyone. My name's Kate. I'm coming to you from Sandmere Studio in Los Angeles, California. Thank you so much for being here today. This is my very first video on this channel. I decided to start YouTube just to have an adventure, just to do something fun, meaningful, to play, to help people. I don't know exactly what this channel, what the adventure of this channel is. But that is what this video is for. So this is the origin story of this channel being created in real time with all of us on both sides of the camera. I'm really coming in with I thought it would be most fun to not know where we're going and then by the end know exactly where we are and be surprised. So that's what we're doing today. Whatever we end up doing, that's what I'm committed to doing. So whatever happens today is what I'm going to make the channel about. I don't know what kind of trouble I'm getting myself into, but I'm open. So I'm going to be using a technique called sandplay. I'm not going to tell you too much about it. I think it will be obvious. It's a Jungian technique, method that therapists use with kids. I'm not a therapist, I'm a creative, but I've adapted this technique because it's fascinating. It involves a library of symbols, which you can kind of see behind me. These are like little figurines and toys that represent archetypes. And then I've got a sandbox over here. I'm going in knowing nothing, and I'm just going to pull symbols intuitively and put them together in an arrangement, and then we'll walk through it and see what it's saying, and we'll make a channel. Let's do it. Well, that wasn't what I quite expected. Okay, I'm really excited to talk about this. Learned a lot. Gonna walk through it together. Um, if you're curious about this process, there's tons of information about it on my website. The link is below. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it now. We're just going to kind of dive in. But essentially, sandplay is a way of creating a bridge between your unconscious mind, your subconscious mind, and your conscious mind. So if you're having a creative dilemma and you can't quite access it, or if you have like a tap of inspiration, but it hasn't fully come forward yet, this is a great format because it works symbolically with your psyche and your body. Actually, it's very tactile. And you sort of download the images, and then as you talk about it, it crosses the bridge from the right side of your brain to the left side of your brain so that you can articulate it and understand it yourself. So that's the process in a nutshell. I'm just mentioning that because when I picked these symbols to go in this sandplay, I was just picking what I was drawn to. I was not picking, it wasn't a choice, it was more like an attraction. And then it was only after I started putting them together that I'm just only now starting to articulate what it all means. So this is very intuitive, and it kind of reveals itself as it goes. So you can learn more about it on my website if you want to. But so we started out with the question, what adventure are we on here on this channel? Okay, so so the first little sequence that came up was this one. There's a little barn with a silo in back of it and these huge creatures around it. There's like a sort of a demonic figure, like a negative figure, and then a positive, sort of angelic, very compassionate figure lingering above this barn. And what occurred to me was it was like this channel, this journey, this audience is for anyone who feels like they've got something creative that they're trying to leave the barn, you know, some kind of trap, creative trap that they're in mentally. And they're sort of got big forces at play to either be so conflicted about how to proceed forward on a project or a life move or something creative going forward that they're having trouble leaving the barn. And I was really drawn, like the barn even has a little silo, and the silo for me sort of represented like all this creative potential that you might have. And it's stored in the silo, and it's supposed to be like distributed out and grown, you know, to become plants and flowers and fruit. But it's just, it's in the silo, it's sort of stuck in there. I didn't have the horse there originally, but originally it was like a little horse inside the barn, afraid to come out because there's big forces, both like positive and negative, hovering over this barn. And this horse, it just felt so tiny. It's just like the feeling of being sort of like not the victim of your own circumstance, but unsure, you know, overwhelmed with how to proceed and kind of locked in the barn. So that's this little tiny horse. This little tiny horse. That would be so that would be the channel would help people who feel like they're in that spot. And then this little path started creating itself with these blue beads. And I mean, that horse from this angle, like the horse just felt like really either grieving or heavy, like very heavy energy, like it was having to summon its courage to go forward out of this barn because it just seemed like very treacherous in the outside world. And it could only do it step by step. So it was just like these little pebbles, one thing at a time. And the pebbles are blue, which sort of felt like very sad almost, like just a water energy, like sadness or grief or troubled. And so troubled that you would have to focus really hard on just taking it one step at a time. So that's what it felt like. It almost felt like that's the channel sort of wanted to help people who were feeling like they were in that state in some way or form. And then it set off on this journey. And then it came to the path sort of opened up a little bit. But then this figure came in, this this face to me reminds me of a dictator. It's just like it's closed and sort of, it looks like closed criticism. It was almost like this little horse went along this path and then arrived at another layer of their mind that was judgmental to themselves. And so it was like they left the barn only to go and find this other bigger barrier to face in the outside world. Maybe it was in their own mind, but maybe it was also in the outside world. So it was sort of like fear in the barn, left the barn, and then was faced with this like closed judgment, like no entry, like couldn't get past a certain point, like a real barrier. And then I was sort of stuck. I was like, I don't know where to go from this. So I kind of like wanted to move things. So I swiped my hand and collapsed this face of judgment to see what would happen. And then I was pulled over to the shelf again. And I came back with this piece, which is another barrier. It was like, it's this castle, like fortress, gate closed. You can't get in. So it was like barrier after barrier. We have this barn and then we have this judgment. And then even when you get the judgment out of the way, there's like another fortress closed. So the feeling was like, this channel is for people who just cannot get past certain barriers in order to create, cannot get their project to go forward for whatever reason. And the barriers just feel so strong. The forces, I mean, the horse is so tiny and all the barriers in front just felt enormous. So I sat there for a long time. I wasn't inspired to pull anything. And this was the most surprising thing of the whole sand play. Nothing happened. I was like, oh, I'm going to have to record this again because nothing's happening. And then I sat down on the floor and I just kind of got quiet. And I felt my own compassion arrive for any and all creators who are trying to bring their soul statement into the world in some way and just cannot. And I felt like the crushing nature of that on one end from the creator side, and on the other end, I felt how much the world needs creativity right now. And it was like this impasse, like there's silos and silos and silos of potential, and people are up against these crushing barriers. And then at the same time, the world is depleted with, innovation, and we're in crisis all the time. And so creativity is like this, sort of the nectar that we need to heal and progress and create a new world for ourselves. So there was an agony of like, oh my gosh, we have all this potential over here, but it can't reach the world because there are these barriers in place. And I was like, I can still feel it. Like I was like very moved by anyone who is struggling this much. And I think one of the reasons I moved is because that's what we do here in my studio. I have creators come in and we work through a guided process to get people past their barriers, because this format is so effective. So I feel like I'm sitting on a tool that could be very accessible to people. And I guess that's why I got a tap on the shoulder to start a YouTube channel, because I wanted to bring it to the collective in some way for free. So I wasn't expecting I wasn't expecting to be moved for myself. And what was very interesting is, as soon as my own heart opened up in this experience, that's when the inspiration started pulling me again. And it was really drawing my attention toward how compassion is a technology. It's an activator. That was super interesting. And so as soon as I embraced the acceptance of my own compassion, and my own willingness to be compassionate publicly, and also see the depth of agony and angst people are in order to be creative, that really started to flow again. So it really did feel like this technology. And so the next thing I grabbed was this ambulance, and it wanted to go right by this barrier. And it was sort of saying like, this channel is an ambulance. Like, this is the purpose of this is to help. And the ambulance went down, and then this firestorm of energy, like we had all this like grief water come in for the horse path at first, and then right across that grief stream, this firestorm of imagery came up. These are technically they're leaves, but for me they represented like fire. And the fire like grew and grew and grew and grew, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder if this is just people's creativity like being lit on fire. But it wasn't. It was actually the fire of compassion. It was sort of a cue for me about, compassion is not in this sense, what I was learning is compassion sounds like a very soft word, but it was demonstrating itself as a wildfire, like not something to be underestimated, like fierce compassion, wild compassion, unbridled compassion, like a force of nature. So it kind of like spread like fire over the whole diagonal of the sandplay, exploded into this fire ring at the end. And so that was a cue for me to say, like, I think for this channel to go forward, I really have to root in fierce compassion for people, which I honestly didn't expect that. I don't mind that. It feels very, I didn't think about that as a technology. And also, being compassionate for people is actually quite vulnerable, because you're making a statement about what you care about. And so of course that would matter on a YouTube channel, but I feel like I'm being called forward in my own, like, stand in your own vulnerability and say what you care about. And because that's the only way this is going to work. So, okay. I think that's the adventure for me. And then that wildfire sort of accumulated to this figure in the corner, and she's got a shell behind her, and it's sort of like was this almost like a reflector of the heat that all this compassion had brought forward. And I saw myself as that figure. She's sort of able to like take the compassion and then she directs it to certain places. This figure is I like how she's directive. So what I was understanding from that is it's sort of like, a YouTube channel has one person on this side of the camera as a focal point, and then on the other side of the camera, there's a collective, and there's a real relationship through the lens that way. And the creative process requires both sides. So we really are creating something together. And the person who's the focus has a job, or has not a job, but a role, a certain part of that configuration. And then the collective also has a certain part of that configuration. And so the focal point is very much about directing the content, the energy, but it's like through the compassion. So it's like embracing the compassion and then making it land in very specific topics or very specific places or with very specific people or audience members. So I was seeing myself as that person. And then her direction like this, it was so neat because I was like, oh, I wonder how the collective role is going to show up next. And you guys all showed up as plants, like greenery that took over the whole box. It was like all that potential that was stored in those silos suddenly got planted and then exploded in greenery, like became overgrown in vines and trees and birds and bees. And it was like a potential realized. So I mean, in my mind, it was so neat because I was imagining, this channel being an access for people to be able to create the things in their silos, and sort of imagining that those things would come to fruition, and this channel will be a part of that for whoever wants to come on this adventure, was really beautiful. And once that greenery all came up, it sort of formed this like collective rise of health and realized potential. And that created a new world in the opposite corners. So it's like these huge dynamics going on the diagonals here, but it's sort of like a rising of creativity, realized creativity. And then that formed a new world, which was situated right in the corner of that first montage by the barn. So it was almost like a return to the barn, but this time the barn had this new perspective of a new world, because once you realize your own potential, now that's out in the world, and now that becomes creative fodder for new things. You make a new world once you realize your creative projects and potential. So it was sort of like, instead of this barn montage being a place of struggle and grief, there was suddenly a new perspective of, we still have the barn, like that's still there. There's still, forces at play in order to be able to create, but there's an understanding that that is how you create the world. And because there's an understanding of that is part of the creative process, and you can get help in that, it doesn't have to be full of suffering. It can actually be like quite pleasurable to learn how to do it that way, to create with positive and negative forces, and not have it feel like agony, but have it feel like pleasure. That perspective changed the sadness of that barn area that was at the beginning, and kind of made it like a really cool homestead. This is a tiny place that serves a purpose because it allows us to create this new world with a new perspective. And then beyond that, there was this universe backdrop that appeared beneath the world. So it was sort of like at the beginning, where the barn was this creator's whole world and it was all full of angst, suddenly the barn is just like a tiny part of the world, and the world is a tiny part of the universe. And because there are those layers of perspective, that diminishes the suffering of being stuck in the barn so much. So it's almost like through this process that we're going to explore on this channel, which will be about exploring people's barriers, exploring common obstacles to creativity, exploring how inspiration happens, how to allow your personal genius to come forward. Through all that exploration, it looked to me like what the channel wants to be is sort of resulting in this amazing perspective where you can see the minute to the vast. And in becoming a person who has that perspective, it lessens the suffering and actually makes it critical and perhaps pleasurable. We'll see. And what was very interesting is I really love existentialism. I could talk a long time about that. And sometimes I get really caught up in the vastness of language and concepts and ideas. And when I put that universe cloth over that side, my little figurine, the like directive woman, she fell off. So I think that was a cue for me to kind of stay in the practical, to keep this channel very grounded. It felt like it wanted to be just usable, accessible, a place where you can come to understand your own mind and understand creativity for some through some new ways, and really bring your projects to fruition. So that's what we're gonna do. I'm in. I'm in. I'm gonna remember to stay very, very compassionate. Use compassion as a technology, which is so cool. Really looking forward to exploring that. I would say, if this interests you at all, drop a comment. I would love to hear, honestly, I would love to hear anything that came up for you while you were listening to this. And you can leave it general or specific, but I would want to kind of craft this series to be provocative, not in the sense of anything subversive necessarily, but as you're listening, I want it to provoke things in your own psyche that feel like they're resonating or feel like that they want to be worked on. And if you're comfortable, make some, formation of a statement about it or a comment in the comment section, and I will use those comments as the subject matter for future videos. And then we can just go on a journey. Let's see if this works. And if not, I'll come up with some of my own for starters, and we'll see how far we get. Anyway, all right, you guys, it's on. Thank you so much. Until next time, we'll see where we go. Bye.